Okay, folks, welcome back to part 3 about barrier islands and lagoons. So this is the last part of our lecture for Monday, the 15th of October, Coastal Processes Part 1. So, what are barrier islands? What are lagoons? In fact, you can find barrier islands and lagoons all up and down the eastern seaboard, specifically as you travel south along the eastern seaboard, North Carolina, and then also all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. Right, and here you have a satellite image actually maybe showing the most famous part of the eastern seaboard with barrier islands and lagoons. So let's blow this up a little bit. And what we have here is first of all the barrier island, which is this long skinny island. Then we have the mainland, and in between the mainland and the barrier island is the so-called lagoon, and then of course outside you have the open ocean. This area here is the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and here is famously Cape Hatteras. Right? So this next picture is what Cape Hatteras looks like basically when you're there, right? So you have Cape Hatteras here, we're looking at the Atlantic Ocean, and here you have that long skinny island, that's the barrier island. This water body here is the lagoon, and then off in the distance here you can see mainland North Carolina. So why is this relevant to our conversation about coastal processes, right? Well, here's the definition first of all. Barrier islands are long and narrow sandbars, if you will, and they can be anywhere from a few hundred meters to several kilometers offshore, right? Very commonly found along the eastern seaboard. Again, here we have an example of a barrier island, in this case Padre Island, in the Gulf of Mexico. So here we have the barrier island, here's the Gulf of Mexico, here's the lagoon, and then here's Texas, if you will, right? Very unique situation, basically just a sandbar, if you will, very shallow water in the lagoon, and the whole barrier island is really only a few feet or so above sea level. So it's a very interesting situation where you're combining, if you will, a big sandbar, the open ocean, and then an area of water sort of wedged between the barrier island and the mainland. And the lagoon is an interesting spot because it's that sort of salty or brackish water body that sits between the mainland and the barrier island. Right? Now, what happens, of course, is that you have a lot of erosion going on the barrier island, and the lagoon itself gets filled with sediment. Right? So what you basically have is you have rivers coming out of the mainland, bringing water and sediment, but all that sediment is deposited in the lagoon. So the lagoon basically fills itself up with sediment. Then you have the tides going in and out, bringing sand, and you have storms overwashing the barrier island. So basically you have an incredibly unstable situation where the barrier island gets eroded and the lagoon gets filled with sediment. Right? So, if you will, lagoons get choked with sediment over time. They turn into mudflats and marshes, and then eventually they become effectively solid dry land, and effectively your barrier island merges with the mainland. Right, so the situation you see right now along the eastern seaboard, where you have these beautiful barrier islands, these beautiful lagoons, and the beautiful mainland, if you will, is a very, very transient, unstable situation, and it's changing rather rapidly as the barrier islands erode and as the lagoons fill with sediment brought by rivers, brought by streams, brought by storms, by tides, and fill up with sediment. Yeah, so once again we're looking at a coastal environment that's beautiful, very dynamic, very vulnerable to natural disasters. You can imagine if you live on the Outer Banks and a hurricane comes by, that's a big problem. Very vulnerable to climate change because of sea level rise, but also extremely beautiful and therefore quite appealing to live. Also very important to the economy. Right? So we've ended our coastal processes part 1. We talked about waves, we talked about beaches, and we finished now talking about barrier islands and lagoons. So that's it, and we will see you on Wednesday actually in class. Thank you very much.